Hello history buffs, this is Mr. Old Timer. I'm 111 years old and I still make my own video. And today I'd like to talk to you about Oxford Lake in Oxford Lake, Alabama. This is a retrospective about Oxford Lake and the Oxford area. And if you'll bear with me, I'd like to read a piece that I typed out to introduce this, okay? Oxford Lake is a popular place to take the kids and maybe do a little exercise. Besides the lake, there are several softball fields that operate to capacity during the season, and the Civic Center, which has something going on 360 something days a year. Oxford Lake has always been a destination and has been for 4 or 5 generations, not counting prehistory. The oldest records I have go back to the 1880s, but we know that the area, no doubt minus the lake, was a popular spot going back thousands of years. What we know for sure is that when the white man first arrived, he found the latest Native Americans, also variously known as Indians, Creeks, Muskogees, and in the vicinity of the lake, the Abicas. The reason the lake area was so popular was because it contained an ever-flowing spring, shown here. Native guys loved good, clear, cold, sanitary water as much as everyone else. And not far away, a half a mile or so, as the moccasin walks, is the mighty Choccolocca Creek, by which one could go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico if one wished. At the very least, it was an easier way to visit relatives in what is today neighboring counties. So happens that I have a lot of history with Oxford Lake. I was raised nearby, and my grandfather was the custodian from the 1920 or so through the war years. Oxford Lake is a boom or bust place. It was boom from the earliest days until after the war, when it slowly faded. The lowest point was in the 1970s, when it went to weeds and fleas. But as you can see today, and for the last 30 years or so, it was given a second life, and it's beautiful, well kept, and popular again. But today's lake isn't why we're here. What I'd like to do is to explore the early days, and you just never know what else we'll run across as we see what's in the Oxford Lake news. And it's all fresh and new, I can guarantee, because with zero doubt you have never heard any of this stuff before. Take her away, Mr. O.T. Hello again, history fan. You may be wondering what you're doing here. You know, I watch a lot of videos on YouTube, and you never know what's going to grab my interest. Just a lot of times whatever lands on my opening page, but history's always kind of fun to me. And I watch a lot of video from all over the world because I like seeing how everybody else does things. So today I'm going to do something a little different. You know, well, first let me show you where Oxford is. You may be from some other continent, okay? So here, let me show you Oxford. This is Oxford, Alabama, and next door to it is Anniston, Alabama, and here's where Oxford Lake is in our local park. So I'm going to do something a little different. There you can find books about the Oxford area, history, and so on and so forth. There are a few. Now I don't know about the YouTube videos, but what I'm going to do today is I'm going to show Oxford Lake history through newspapers, old newspapers, and up to a point, up to about 1920 or so. And I'm going to be using, for the most part, a paper out of Birmingham called the Birmingham Age-Herald, and there are other papers, but that's probably going to be the main one. I'm not going to use the local newspaper because that would cost me money. Also, pictures are hard to come by because they're owned by the local library, and they are very expensive, and they are copyrighted out the wazoo anyway, so I'm not going there. You could probably find some pictures somewhere, and again, probably on Amazon, a book about it, but let's look at it from old newspapers. And we know from experience with new newspapers, well, you know, they didn't always get it right, but it is what it is, and it's what we got to use. So we're going to start out today in 1915 with an overview from the Birmingham Age-Herald. It would be November the 28th, 1915, and they did a history of Oxford back then. And what we're going to learn in this piece right here is that in 1827, keep in mind, in Alabama, the Creek Indians were sent packing in 1835, 34, 36, although some left earlier. So the territory was opening up to the white guy. And with that backdrop, in 1827, the article states that a drummer, which is, back in those days they had fellows that came around with mule packs, packs of mules, and they would lead them around, and early on they would visit the Indian villages, but later on they would go to the white settlements. So when they came through, one came through here, and he went to a residence that he found here. It said in a rocky hollow, and for my life, I can't hardly imagine where there's a rocky hollow in Oxford, but that's what it said. And it was on the side of a creek. And he asked him, could he have supper? And they said no, because they had scarce grease, spelled as I show you here, scarce grease. So that's what the place was called for a time. But then he went on the other side of the creek, and the other place that was here, the other little farmstead of starving people, there was just two. He asked them, could he have supper there? And they said, well, yeah, but they just finished and he'd have to lick the skillet. So for many years, up until 1847, Oxford was called Lick Skillet. And the story goes on to tell how a fellow here came along and changed the name to Oxford. And in my mind at least, it could be named for Oxford, England, or the fact that there was a creek that we have here to this day called Snow's Creek that you had to be forded. So maybe that was it. Maybe that to get into town. So maybe that was it. Maybe that's why they call it Oxford. Well, I don't know. The article goes on to say that the town was formally organized in 1857, Oxford was, and water was run in 1900 and sewage in 1912. And by 1915, 90% of the homes had electricity. It burnt down twice before the last edition came to pass, which is what, if you come to Oxford today, you'll see is what what you would have seen probably in 1915 or so. About Oxford Lake, look at this right here. This is a pavilion. Again, this is in 1915. This is a picture, a current picture in 1915. This is the pavilion at Oxford Lake Park. I've never seen that. I was born in 1955, and this thing was gone. There was not a hint of this. I don't know where the pavilion was, so it must have burnt down too. Everything at Oxford Lake burnt down at one time or another. As a matter of fact, I saw at least one fire down there out my back window as a child when the concession stand burnt down, which was very old in itself. But this is the pavilion, and I've never seen this. Okay, we're on to the Birmingham Age-Herald, dated Sunday, June 9th, 1895. That's the oldest newspaper that I have about Oxford Lake. And it says at Oxford Lake, the shop employees of the Southern Railway, that is, spent yesterday on their annual outing, and the lucky contestants had prizes. And I'd like to read just a little bit about this right here. Yesterday, the shop employees of the Southern Railway had their annual outing at 8 a.m., boarded a train of 9 coaches and a baggage car pulled by a handsomely decorated engine and left for Oxford Lake. I presume they're talking about they probably left out of Birmingham, but I don't know. And by the way, I'm going to have links to everything I'm talking about that you can see below the video here. And two, if you happen to know some things that I don't, I'd love to hear from you. If you got some facts that I don't, I'd love to hear from you, because I may make a mistake here, and if you can correct me, I'd appreciate it. If you know something I don't, a lot of people around here know about Oxford Lake that from around here, and they don't often get a chance to comment. So this is your chance. If you know about Oxford Lake, give. All right. Well, at any rate, they got to Oxford Lake, and during the day, A number of prizes were awarded in different sports, and the results were as follows. Best Lady Waltzer, fine pair of slippers by T.C. King, won by Miss Jenny Weiss. And you see it goes on down the list right here about people who won things. The most popular gentleman, box of cigars by Joe Frank, won by Mr. N.M. Williams. And of course the three-legged race, well, you see who won that, the boys race. Necktie by Summers Tailoring Company, won by Willie Coughlin. The most popular employee, Fine Lounge by Stowers Furniture Company, won by Mr. W.L. Tracy. And of course the best quadrille dancer, box of cigars. Now these are probably Birmingham people. Oxford Lake, again, Oxford Lake, the people that know the most about it who are still alive live in Oxford. But the thing about Oxford Lake is it was at one time, for a long time, the Six Flags of the southeastern United States. Special trains came from Birmingham and Atlanta here all the time, bringing people to Oxford Lake. So there are people all over the place that have some history down here. They probably don't know it, but their ancestors came and had a good time. Okay, the next one. The Birmingham State Herald, Thursday, September the 10th, 1896. We know that the lake went at least back to the 1880s, but this is the earliest I can find about it. I'm sure there's more. But in 1896, on that date, the Motormen of the Oxford Lake Line will give a ball at Oxford Lake next Tuesday evening. Wow, that sounds like fun. And I'm going to be talking about the Oxford Lake Line a little more. That's a fascinating part of Oxford Lake. We'll get back to that momentarily. But another thing on the page that I found, and this is something about doing research in old newspapers. You're looking for one thing, but you find something else that catches your interest. And this did, certainly. This is Mrs. Senator Warren. And she tells us why Payne's celery compound is famed in Washington families. And says many persons of health have found an excuse out of health have found an excuse in hot weather, and it's hot weather as we do this video here in Alabama. Hot weather have an excuse in hot weather for doing nothing toward getting well. I will wait until fall, they promised themselves. It is now time, if ever, in thousands of cases, to keep that promise. Nothing should now interfere with building up the weakened nerves, and nothing works better to build up weakened nerves and other things than Payne's celery compound, which is famed by Washington families. And people in Washington, D.C. probably still taking the stuff. Payne's celery compound. And from the Birmingham State Herald, Thursday, October the 8th, 1896, this piece. It says the Oxford Lake Line to rebuild shops coming to Birmingham. Says special correspondence. And again, this is a Birmingham newspaper, but I'm sure the local newspaper sent them stuff to put in their newspaper. Anniston, October 7th. On some lots owned by the company on the southwest corner of 6th and Wilmer Streets, I'm going to show you a picture of what it looks like today. The Oxford Lake Line will begin tomorrow the erection of machine shops for the repair of its cars and equipment, erecting sheds, car barn, and so on. The new plant will take the place of the shops and barn at Oxford Lake, and the latter will be abolished. The new shops will be a great deal more convenient than the old and can be operated at much less expense. Okay, the importance of this story is about the Oxford Lake Line. The Oxford Lake Line was streetcars. They called them trolley cars in Oxford. And it went from, eventually from a place called Blue Mountain, which was a little bit north of downtown Anniston. And it went through Anniston to all the way down to Oxford Lake, and it turned around and went back. It took about a half hour to make the journey, and they called it the Oxford Lake Line. Originally it was streetcars pulled by horses. But later on, as electricity, we got electricity here, they were electrical. And You know, even as a young kid, I'm saying probably the early 70s, I can still remember seeing those trolley tracks in downtown Oxford, because they just paved over the things, and the pavement, as it wore down, it exposed those the little trolley tracks, and I remember seeing them, and they're probably still under the street right now. But anyway, it was called the Oxford Lake Line. From the Birmingham Age-Herald, Saturday, October the 28th, 1899. I have to ask you, do you have melancholia? You see, a disordered liver causes sad thoughts when the nerves are overstrained by work or care. The liver, stomach, kidneys immediately become weakened in their action, and the body is made foul and unhealthy with impure blood and bile. And you know what you take for that? Can you guess? Pain celery compound. Liver, stomach, and kidneys, the world's remedy for disease. Wow. But, okay, same date, same place, kind of the same town here. We've got the Northeast Alabama Fair Association, Oxford Lake, October the 31st to November 4th. On account of the Northeast Alabama Fair Association at Oxford Lake, Alabama, October 31st to November 4th inclusive, tickets will be sold from points on the Southern Railway and Alabama Great Southern Railroad between Rome, that's Rome, Georgia, and Calera, Alabama, Austell, Georgia, and Birmingham, Fort Payne, and Tuscaloosa to Anniston, and return at the rate of one fare for the round trip. So, if you want to come to Oxford Lake to see the fair, you will save money with one price buys a round trip ticket. So, let's don't miss that. Big fair, Oxford Lake. Okay, boys and girls, our next offering brings us to the Age-Herald on July the 3rd, 1900, and here they talk about the coming July the 4th celebrations, which brings an interesting thing into play. Let me come down here and show you. It says Anniston, July 2nd. I don't know. I don't know how that works, how this thing is written like the day before. Beats me. It says practically all of the manufacturing industries in Anniston will suspend operation in order that their employees may celebrate the 4th. There will be no 4th of July celebration in this city, but at Oxford Lake, a suburban resort, preparations have been made to entertain a large crowd. I don't know if they're talking about Birmingham or Anniston. Probably Anniston. Anniston, in my lifetime, hasn't done much for the 4th. It seems like all the Anniston, there's always been a kind of a rivalry around here between Anniston and Oxford, your sister cities. But it seems like all the Anniston people always come down to Oxford Lake for the 4th of July. Me personal, I think I have missed 2 in my lifetime. You go down there, they have fireworks, and you know, they sell stuff to eat and everything. They've always done it in one fashion, form, or another. It's a little more modern today than it used to be when I was a kid, but same deal. It's about the same fireworks show it always was, maybe a little better. But at any rate, the Anniston folks came down to Oxford to enjoy July the 4th. Yeah. This next is from July the 14th, 1901, from the Montgomery Advertiser. And interestingly enough, this is one I've been dreading. There's another one I've been dreading as well, but this is pretty tough. It says, gardens destroyed. Hot weather burns up vegetation. Farmers report that corn is dying in the field and cotton wilts in the middle of the day. Oddly enough, this is way before global weather change was occurring, and here in Alabama, as I do this in the year of 2024, our Lord, it is hot and gardens are dying. Okay, so it's interesting that in 1901 it's kind of like the same as it is in 2024. So 123 years later, if I did my math right. It's kind of weird, isn't it? But here's a story I was dreading. Young people thrown into Oxford Lake. This could have been a tragedy, ladies and gentlemen. Horses attached to wagonette became frightened and dashed into the water, but luckily no serious injuries sustained. Last night, about 8:30 o'clock at Oxford Lake, about 3 miles south of this city, I believe they're talking about Anniston, what Well, it is Anniston. They are 3 miles. What came near being a terrible disaster was narrowly averted. A party of Oxford young people, Mr. Manning Christian, Mrs. Annie Howell, Irma Christian, Vesta Bagley, Mary Snow, Eileen and Maddie Wilson, Holly Manning, and Trixie Humphreys were returning. These are names that are known around here today. I mean, the last names, whatever that is, are known around here today. Some of them, sure enough. They were returning in a wagonette from the Boiling Springs, which is a couple of miles from Oxford Lake, a couple of miles east of Oxford Lake. There, as far as I know, there was just one place out there. It was a plantation, sort of, back in the day, and it's no longer there. Some guy burnt the house down out there. It was a plantation house. It was a icon around here. Some guy burned it down years ago. That's probably where they were out there at Boiling Springs. So the party drove around the lake, and all went well until the bathhouse was passed. I'm not sure where the bathhouse was. Here a child ran in front of the horses. The animals plunged forward, and just then a part of the harness broke, and the animals ran forward into the lake. The vehicle was turned completely over, and all the young people were overturned and went under the waters of the lake, which I've got to tell you, at that point was probably about 4 feet deep. Miss Trixie Humphreys was caught underneath the wagonette and held under for water for several seconds. When relieved from her terrible position, she was nearly exhausted from strangulation. But there were a lot of people down at the lake, and they pulled her out from the lake, and she survived. So that was a near tragedy. I've been dreading telling y'all that one. Let's go to the next one real quick, okay? Get away from this. Moving right along, the Age-Herald, Thursday, May 11th, 1905. This piece is about the Oddfellows. You know, I looked those guys up on Wikipedia, and you can too. The Oddfellows they're still around, but I don't think, probably like all other great clubs that America ever had, they're probably not as popular as they used to be. But when it says Oddfellows at Anniston or guest, it almost looks like the person who wrote this just assumes that everybody knows what Oddfellow is. So maybe back in the day everybody knew what they were, but probably you may have to go look them up. But it says, at any rate, during the afternoon the Grand Lodge was the guest of the General Entertainment Committee at a barbecue at Oxford Lake. Arrangements had been made whereby every concession at the resort was thrown open to the visitors, and the afternoon proved rare enjoyment. The barbecue was well served and the meats well cooked. No session of the grand body was held during the afternoon. I'd like to tell you at this point about my grandfather. He was the custodian at Oxford Lake. I think I may have mentioned this, from about 1920 through the World War II years. And a big thing that he did was barbecues, and quite frequently. But you know, July the 4th was the biggie, okay? And it's a sweet and sour. It's a very thin stuff. You don't barbecue with it. You put it on your meat after it's barbecued. And on chicken, it is out of this world. You've never tasted anything like it. And what he would do when he would barbecue, he would dip the meat into the sauce, and then it gave it a smoky flavor. So the story goes is that they'd have reunions and all kind of stuff down there. But like I say, on July the 4th, the old Civil War soldiers would come down there and meet and eat. And he said, and I was told these fellas didn't have any teeth. So what would happen was they would have the sauce in a plate or bowl or something, and take bread and dip it in there and eat it. Because they didn't have any teeth, they could eat the bread, and eat the barbecues. Make believe they're eating barbecue because they're eating a soppy bread. So that's one tale. But a barbecue was there's a lot of barbecuing going on at Oxford Lake over the years. It's still happening. Probably not as much as it used to, and it might be on some kind of a truck selling barbecue, but I mean back in the day. And another thing, you're going to find that all these companies were carrying their employees down there and giving them the day and feeding them and everything else. When's the last time your business carried you off and fed you all day, and you had sack races and family stuff like that? When's the last time that happened? Most businesses. Maybe the government does it, but I mean a regular business, most of them don't do that anymore. And that's a shame. Shame. Hello history friends, this is Mr. OT again. I had planned on making one big video, but it's just too darn big. And well, you'd probably get bored and my computer won't do a monster video like that, so I'll split it up. So this is the end of part 1. What you'll want to do is visit my page, subscribe, and check out the next 2 videos on Oxford Lake. See you there.